Hi, everyone. This is McLeJ Neal. If you can hear me, sounds like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. I hear like a chopping sound. So I just want to make sure we're okay before we get started. Okay. Okay, is everyone able to hear me okay? We have with us four candidates for office in the District 40 City Council. And before I introduce them, I just want to make sure everyone's good. Okay, great. I see Rita, I see Josh, I see Miss Kenya here. Thanks for joining. And Edwin, I know he's on. There's his video. Okay, great. All right, well, thanks everyone. We're gonna get started. My name is McElvey J. Neal, Managing Editor of the Haitian Times, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to another community conversation, a series that the Haitian Times began holding earlier this year in January. And between now and June, we'll be holding a series of conversations specifically on the New York City municipal elections coming up. And so tonight we kick off that series with the candidates for District 40 in Brooklyn, in Central Brooklyn. So when we say Central Brooklyn District 40, what I think about is the quintessential Haitian spot, right? If you think about like where Haitians are in Brooklyn, like chances are this is what you're talking about. So we're saying Flatbush, East Flatbush, Ditmas Park, Prospect Lefferts Gardens, Midwood, Kensington, and all of these different parts that abut the district. So I'm happy today to welcome a few of the front runners in the race. It's a very exciting race for different reasons with lots of contenders. And so this year, as many of you may know, in New York City, we're trying out ranked choice voting, which means that instead of just picking one person and moving on, we're going to have to choose our favorites, right? We're going to have to choose who we would like to see in the seat first, second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way down the list. And so I urge anyone who can vote to plan to do so on June 22nd. Make sure your voter registration card and eligibility are all up to date in the lead up to the primary elections on June 22nd. So with that, we'll get started to hear about from the four candidates we have, why they feel like they would be the best representative in the City Council for District 40. Tonight, we have Ms. Rita Joseph, Josh Pierre, Joseph Pierre, Lieutenant Edwin Raymond, and Ms. Kenya Hendy Hilliard. I'll start with Rita to introduce her. Rita is a mom, public school teacher, proud union member, and community activist. She immigrated from Haiti in her youth and began her life of advocacy then. At just 19 years old, she organized her first rally with a group that she founded called Haitian Enforcement Against Racism in order to protect the protest, the FDA's discriminatory bad blood, quote unquote, rules that prevented people of Haitian descent from donating blood. So that rally succeeded in its mission and the FDA rescinded the racist rule. So that's the caliber of person we have today running for the district. Next up is Josh Pierre. He is a longtime Brooklynite, staunch affordable housing advocate and community organizer. He's worked as a senior financial analyst, investing New York City teachers' pension money into affordable housing projects, and more recently as the Brooklyn Borough Director for the Office of the New York City Comptroller, Scott Stringer. He was born in Haiti, but raised in Flatbush, like me. And Josh and his family have lived the struggles faced by thousands of New Yorkers pursuing the American dream. His mom was a longtime member of the 1199 SEIU union, and his father, a blue collar worker in the US's, a blue collar worker. He's attended public schools his entire life, and he's also a proud graduate of CUNY's Baruch College. So welcome, Josh. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Edwin Raymond is also a child of Haitian immigrants. He was born and raised and currently still residing in the East Flatbush section of Brooklyn. He joined the New York City Police Department in 2008 to work from the inside, he says, to remedy some of the injustices he faced as a young man. So we'll be interested to hear some of that story from him directly tonight. Raymond is currently an NYPD lieutenant, and he's running to make sure that the district has the teachers, the hospitals, the funding, and all of the other opportunities it deserves, including making sure it's not over-policed. Again, we'll be interested to hear his perspective, being both a police officer and a Haitian American running for office, knowing those struggles. Last but not least, we have Kenya Handy Hillard with us tonight. Kenya graduated from Smith College in Massachusetts with a degree in social psychology and began her career in public service working for champions of progressive agendas such as Congressmember Charles B. Rangel and Congressmember Yvette D. Clarke on Capitol Hill in DC. She's led the Congressmember Clarke's legislative and social agendas, which focus on passing a comprehensive immigration reform package that address the issues immigrants of the African diaspora face. So welcome everyone. I'd like to start with one question for all of you I'd like you to address. And the question is why you feel like when you look at all the candidates in the race, why you think you would be the best candidate to be in the seat, what makes you stand out, and what you would do in the seat that no one else really can. I'll start with you, Rita, and we'll go around the room.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. Hello, Edwin, Josh, and Kenya. Hi. Why I'm the best person for this job? Because I've been on the grounds since I was 19 years old. I work and live in the district. I've seen what the district, the changes that's come about in this district. I feel that I have the pulse of the people. I have their ears. I can hear them. I can listen to them. I talk to them all the time. It's not just because I'm running for office. I'm listening to their concerns now. I've always been on the ground listening to their concerns and helping out in every way that I can, whether it's to accompany my seniors to court when they have problems with their landlords, whether it's to translate for them when they're filling out their forms, whether it's when they're ready to become US citizens, I'm there to make sure that their forms are being filled out. Whether it's the easiest thing, fill out their money order to pay their rents. I've always been there for my community to support them, whether it's through clothes drive, food drive, and I didn't have to wait for COVID-19. When I saw the needs, I jumped in and I started working from day one. I didn't have to wait for a pandemic to know that the needs were there. The kind of work that I've been doing is the kind of work an elected should be doing, but I've been on the grounds doing this work, whether it's through my school, the church, hospitals, seniors, all of that. So I feel that with lived experience, yeah, I've never been elected, but it's as if I was elected. So I feel with lived experience, I can sit in this seat and lead this community.
Thank you, Rita. We'll go to Josh next.
Merci tout le monde pour chance pour nous parler là. Thank you everyone for coming on here and this opportunity to speak to members of the community. Again, my name is Josiah Pierre. You guys can call me Josh. You know, everybody has a unique experience, but there are some commonalities to our experiences. Like was said earlier, I wasn't born here. I was born in Haiti. Came here when I was 5 years old, had to learn the language. My dad worked 3 jobs to get us into this country. My granddad, he was a taxi driver, medallion, and my mom, she was a home health aide. And many people have that background where our parents show up to do that type of work to make sure that we're successful. So giving that and living in Flatbush, where it was very difficult to raise kids, I grew up with the 3 L's, and a lot of Haitians know what the 3 L's are: l'église, l'école, la caille. Those were all the only places I was allowed to be, right? And I grew up in that environment, and partially them doing that helped me to be in a stable situation where I could get an education, even though we didn't go to the best schools. And I studied finance, accounting. I eventually made my way to being a senior financial analyst at the office of the New York City Comptroller. When I got that job, it was me and my best friend who left the same school, got the same degree. He decided to leave Flatbush as soon as he could. I decided to stay because I believe that my talents and contributions could help out. So what am I bringing to the table? I'm the only candidate in this race that has real experience in affordable housing. I helped finance the construction of over 3,000 units of real affordable housing from the Bronx to East New York, and I want to bring that here into the district. I also have background and experience in policy and budgeting, right? Real finance experience. At the end of the day, a lot of the things we want to do, whether it's schooling, healthcare, et cetera, you have to have the budget background, the real fundamental budget background to actually do that. And that's why I'm the only candidate that last year actually spoke at the budget hearing for the city council on behalf of the district to say, don't cut our summer youth program, don't cut our sanitation, don't cut fair student funding that helps immigrant kids like me learn English. So I bring that to the table, but I also bring to the table the idea that you don't have to have a paid job in government to do the work. So I've always been an activist, and I was the only candidate that traveled up to Albany for the housing rent loss fight. The only time I've ever been arrested in my life, and you know how Haitian parents feel about their kids and arrest, was because I was lobbying and protesting in front of Governor Cuomo's office. They didn't want us there. Was the first person that got arrested was Jemani Williams. The second person was me. And so it's not just about what we do in our professional lives, it's what we do in our personal lives to show that we care about the community. I understand the sufferings and the struggles of the community. I understand how to convert it into policy, and I understand how to make sure that the resources are there after we do that to make sure that we get what we want. And at the end of the day, 90% of what the Haitian community needs is no different from what other communities need.
Okay, thanks so much for that summary. I'll have some follow-up questions for you on the affordable housing piece.
Thank you.
Sure. So Edwin, let's go to you next. Why are you the best candidate to be in this seat?
All right, first, I'd like to thank Haitian Times for having this. I'd like to thank colleagues who are on, people who are watching now live, and people who will be watching the recording. This election cycle is very interesting. We have hello?
Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I don't know where that's coming from. That's me?
Yeah. Okay, let's try again. Edwin, one more time. Unmute.
Hello?
Okay.
I don't know where this music is coming from.
The alarm on your phone, bro.
Okay. Well, how about we go to Kenya while you work that out, Edwin? Is that okay? Maybe try rejoining, like close down all your browsers and try rejoining. This is, you know, how it is with Zoom these days. There's always something. Kenya, are you able to speak to why you're the best candidate for this seat? For this?
Sure. Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Haitian Times, for inviting me to speak here with you all today. I believe that I am the best choice for this position because I've been doing the work. I've been delivering on all levels of government for this community for 14 years of my career in government service. I started my career working for Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, fighting for communities of color, especially within the immigrant diaspora, specifically prioritizing Haitian and other diaspora communities for comprehensive immigration reform. I was the lead staffer that introduced the Haitian Emergency Life Protection Act, which we introduced right after the earthquake. That later became the Haitian Family Reunification Parole Program, that many of our family members came here to Brooklyn to wait for their green cards. So I have tangible experience where I've used legislative language, I've negotiated that language into law and making sure that it is tangible for our communities to see. I grew up in this community. I was raised by the diversity of this community. And so it's not just, although I'm not of Haitian descent, I understand and have lived experience with just growing up in a diasporic community. I will eat fried chicken and black rice at the same time, right? So that is what Flatbush has created. And so when it comes to understanding the individual influences, needs, and specific nuances, I have that ability to take an issue, to put it into legislative language, like I've done on comprehensive immigration reform, working on budgetary issues, like I've done with working on the city level, fighting for against the budgets on tenant harassment and deed theft, and making sure that those resources are actually realized on the ground. And it's also about the investigative piece, making sure that your tax dollars as professionals and as citizens and contributors to this society, that your money is actually being spent appropriately. So it's not just about, being an activist is a commendable position, and an activist on the street is very important, but it's very different than a legislator in the seat. And so it's about having an understanding on what to do on both ends and how to negotiate the needs of the people on the ground and how to actually make it so that you can see it from the legislative process, budgetary process, through the woods, down to on the corners on the sidewalk, so that you can see it, feel it, and it's tangible to you.
That sounds like amazing experience, and I think the community is lucky to have all of the candidates with us here tonight. See that Edwin is back. Let's go to him next to see if he'd like to fill us in on why he's the best candidate for this job.
All right, sorry about that little hiccup. It was another browser, I had to figure it out. So as I was saying, we have a very interesting variety of candidates, and all of us come with different strengths. But why I think it's absolutely crucial that that I'm elected to the position is because the work that I've done in official capacity in law enforcement and beyond. We see this issue with policing. No matter how many times we try to reform it, it doesn't work. And the people in the positions trying to reform this thing, they mean well. But when you don't know, you don't know. And what's the nuances of what's going on within the police department, within police culture, within the entire criminal justice system, there's a lot of guesswork. Again, well-meaning, but not surgical. I've dedicated 13 years of my life to fully understanding how this thing works and exactly what's needed to rectify it. Every single time another Black person, brown person, anyone is killed or hurt or derailed because of police action, it reminds me how much that my perspective is needed. Flatbush, District 40 in total, has an opportunity to send one of their own to City Hall to finally rectify this thing so the entire nation can benefit. You have to remember, other police departments emulate the policing style and structure of the NYPD. 36,000 members of the NYPD, over $5 billion budget. They emulate the NYPD for many reasons. And I'm a fighter for the community. I've dedicated my life to this community. I've sacrificed everything for this community. I come from nothing. My mother died when I was only 3 years old. I don't know my mother's voice. My father struggled with my brother and I. From the time I was 6 years old, he wasn't working. He fell into deep depression. I've already beaten those odds for personal success. And yet maybe 3 years into my career, I earned enough money to go east, as many people do. I didn't go east. I stayed in East Flatbush because that example is needed. I stayed here because I wanted to stay connected to the issues. So no matter where I go in the police department, I will always be connected to what's going on the ground. So this is why, again, the political backgrounds are important, but this is a very unique, knowledge that I'm going to bring to City Hall to finally fix this thing. I promise you, I will finally get this thing in a position where we'll see the tangible results almost immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. I just have a follow-up quickly from what you said, because it sounds like, I mean, your words were going to City Hall to rectify, policing and continue to become a model, stay a model for the rest of the nation, right? Outside of policing, can you talk a little bit about how you would address some of the other issues, right, that the community faces, specifically economic relief and aid coming out of this pandemic? Immigration, policy people talk about. I know that's not doable at a local level, but how do you plan to make sure that those issues, those concerns are addressed on behalf of your constituents? Similarly with affordable housing, so there's a lot there. So how would you do that as a novice without legislative experience?
Absolutely, and it's a valid question. Obviously, police reform being a signature issue, the responsibilities of a council person goes far beyond that. Just police reform, obviously. I'll start with immigration. One of the things that my dad accomplished before he died that he was most proud of is he became naturalized. And this is something we have to expand in our community. There are many avenues to naturalization that our people just don't know. One of them being, after a certain amount of time, you can actually take the test in your own native language. These are the things that, people in communities that don't speak English don't know. The rest of the West Indian communities, most of which they benefit from coming from Anglophone nations, they don't have those concerns. Those are concerns that are exclusive to those who don't speak English. So that's one thing. In the city council, it's crucial that we have training seminars and clinics that train folks how to take the test, both in the English version of the test, both the oral and the written version of the test. Because when you're being interviewed, that's a big part of the exam also. Also, when the last president won and became president-elect, one of the number one questions that I was asked by business folks who hired people who weren't documented was, what do I do if ICE comes? And people need to know their rights. For instance, if ICE has a warrant, if ICE doesn't have a warrant with a specific name, you don't have to let them in. And I watched as so many businesses and some people were dropping their kids off to school, et cetera, were raided by ICE, eventually taken to camps and then eventually deported.
So your overall approach would be to educate the community about.
That's one of the things that's needed in communities that don't speak English, the routes to naturalization. Because once you naturalize, there's a cushion there, there's a buffer there. And a lot of folks should be naturalized and they don't know the different routes and different, if you have certain disabilities, et cetera, they can waive the exam altogether. These are things that our people don't know. So that's one of the things that I plan to have at least coming from my office, and see if my colleagues in the council will expand to the rest of the city for other communities that are diverse in language. In terms of other areas, for affordable housing, one of the things that, in my research in the last 3 years, it's the word affordable. The metrics used to determine affordability, it's disrespectful to, when you really consider the income of the area. And it doesn't have to remain that way, which is why I always say we have to work with our federal partners to recalculate what the area median income is, so that when units are going up, that the community is for, people can actually live in it. Imagine pouring into this community for 30 plus years. And right before you, as you walk back and forth to your destination, you're watching construction happening, and you don't even qualify for a tour of the building. We have to end that, and we can.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And let me go to Josh to help us understand how, from his experience, right, at the comptroller's office and just knowing the legislative process. Josh, you mentioned specifically bringing 3,000 units of housing, I believe, to the city. Yeah, so walk us through like how you would do that for District 40, but to Edwin's point, not only bring them in, but make sure that the people who live there now, who want to stay in the neighborhood, are actually able to afford them.
Okay, so what we're talking about is the housing crisis in general, and there are multiple phases to it, and building the housing is one aspect. But let's talk about first how we got what is actually exacerbating the crisis. You have a number of people who, whenever you speak to people who are saying like, I'm looking for housing, well, they didn't just drop out of the sky and started looking for housing. They had housing and somehow they're either in danger of losing it. And part of the reason is because of all the nefarious eviction practices that are used to exploit people, in particular Black and brown people. But when you, on top of that, don't speak English and are not acculturated to English, it makes it easier for people to take advantage of you. So all up and down Ocean Avenue in this district, you see people being kicked out of these 2-bedroom apartments, and then they're being replaced by 4 bedrooms. And a lot of those targets are people in the Haitian community because the landlords feel that they cannot defend themselves. So one of the things that I've put forward and is a proposal, a piece of legislation that I put out last year, and I look forward to pushing in the New York City Council, is the idea that we should have a tenant protection unit. And what that tenant protection unit will do is, one, educate people on what their rights are, work with local nonprofits to actually get to people in the community. And two, the overall gist of it is we passed real laws in Albany, but we understand that if people don't know what those laws are, it's as if those laws don't exist. So for people in the Haitian community, Urdu speaking community, those laws don't exist. Secondly, we do have a demand problem and a supply problem where we're just not building enough. Whenever a building goes up, like look at 123 Linden, where that building went up, and you walk by it and you already know it's not even for you when you grow up in this community. People would probably not hate development as much in this community if they could look at these buildings and say, you know what, I can see myself in that. Usually when you apply through Housing Connect to get what is actually affordable to you, it's gonna end up being in the Bronx or East New York. And coincidentally, that's a lot of where the housing that I financed was, in the Bronx and East New York. So there's a number of reasons for that. One, you have to work with nonprofit developers that are not profit driven, but are driven by the need to create more affordable housing. And so those developers will come to the finance window and say, hey, what do you have there available for us? So we provide cheaper financing. We provide, it gets into the weeds of it, but it makes it easier to build more affordable housing. Secondly, any land that is government-owned land that is being transitioned out of government hands for housing purposes should be 100% affordable. And what is affordable for who? It should be affordable for the people who live in that zip code, in that census tract, in that area, that have been there for the last 30 years, making it happen. And finally, with respects to, even when you do have it, with respects to communities like our community, the Haitian community, or the Spanish-speaking community, even when you have the affordable housing, you feel locked out of it because you are not part of the process. You don't understand the process. One of the things that I want to do, and I'm committed to doing as the next council member in the 40th district, is that we have a monthly intake where people come and you have people who speak your language, can help you through the process and help you fill out those applications. Most people think they just go in, fill it out once, and within the next 5 years, they'll get a call back. They actually don't even realize that every time a building comes out, they have to do that. So I'm not waiting to get elected to office to do that. I've actually been educating people about this on my civic education program in Haitian Creole and on social media in English. So every Sunday on my radio show on Radio Pano Sac Passe Brooklyn, I take the time to actually explain to people, these are the things that are available to you, this is how you apply, and these are the places that you go to. So I have a track record of building the housing, I have a track record of educating people on it, and it's something I'm very passionate about, and I don't think it can be matched. And that's one of the many reasons that I believe that I'm the best candidate to represent the people of Flatbush. Thank you.
Josh. Thank you for that sweeping answer. I think you covered a lot of ground, and it's good to hear that you have some solutions that you'd like to propose, including the tenant protection unit, and that you do have this radio show where you're educating people in Creole. So I have just 2 follow-up questions for you. Is like, one, an example of someone that you've helped either secure housing or pointed in the right direction over the time you've been hosting the show, and then we'll go into community engagement and what that takes with Rita after you touch on that.
So I have at least 2 people that I know that because I used to send out housing emails for the past 5+ years, whenever something would come out, that applied and ended up at one of the projects in Williamsburg because that was available and there was housing in their range. They fit certain criteria. Some of it has to do with disabilities, others has to do with the fact that they're seniors. Separately, we know that we have the project that just came up at, what's that church called? Pastor Nicolas Church, Fishers of Men. That project just went up just over the past few months. And because we brought him in, we had him break it down to people in the community. A lot of Haitian people applied for that. And we look forward to them being successful in getting into some of those apartments. Mm-hmm. And that's what it takes. You have to really understand the community, meet them halfway. Don't just throw something on the internet and say, okay, Batzelu. You gotta really walk people through it so that they understand what the process is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that segues really well into the idea of community engagement, right? Like, how do you do that in a sustainable way where it's not just you, the council member, doing the work, but like having a staff in place or some sort of model where people know that they can come to you for the small things and the big things. So Rita, you mentioned being on the ground and doing the work, even though you have not been an elected official. So talk to us about how you could do that at scale if you are elected, that level of community engagement.
Thank you. For example, the 1488 Pastor Nicolas building, I was the point person on that project. So when I worked on that project, what we found with a lot of our Haitian seniors didn't have access to devices to set up the housing accounts. So what we did is every Friday for a month, about a month and a half, we met at Pastor Nicolas Church and we signed up the seniors. We created the accounts for them. I created the emails, of course, with partnership. I don't do anything by myself. I did it with Pastor Nicolas, and I also did it with other members of the church where they came out with all of their documents and I sat there and we walked them through the process. We filled out the application for them. We applied for them. We took their documents. We put it in. Even as far as some of the seniors were like, email. So even the basic, to create the email, just to have that. And I had to remind them, you have to go back 5 days. If they say, okay, you've been picked for the apartment, you have to go 5 days. You have 5 days to respond once you get the apartment before you lose it. So I still had seniors calling me even after the process to be like, did I make it? Did I make it? I said, well, you have to check your email and then get back to me and let me know so I can know what the next step is. So that's one of the ways that community engagement is key. And of course, Josh talked about it, language access. We have that a lot where they're like, oh, when they go to court, they feel intimidated. People who go to court, even with college degrees, who can read and write, feel intimidated. So when you get there, you always ask for an interpreter. That's one of the reasons why I started accompanying my seniors, because they'll say yes to everything. Did you? Yes. No. Speak up, get an interpreter. Language access will be very important. So that's one of the things. In my office, when I become city council, you'll meet with me every month, whether it's via Zoom or in person. I will be having clinics as well to educate you, whether it's on housing, how to get public assistance, how to do whatever it is that you need, healthcare and health insurance. New York City just came out with New York Cares for undocumented immigrants that live in New York City. That's important information. We have a lot of undocumented members of our communities that we need to also guide to getting information and knowing where the information is. Even the simple thing as enrolling your child in school. That's intimidating itself because it's a huge institution. And if I don't speak the language, definitely going to feel intimidated. And that's why we have to provide language access. At the schools, language access have to be provided at the hospital, on every level of government. I have to feel that even if I go, I speak broken French, broken Creole, I should be able to understand. Someone should be able to help me and guide me through the process. Mande pou interprète qui pou parler pour nous, qui pou aider nous, pas si rien, pas coûter personne, parler avec juge ou pas comprendre, bon yon moun qui pou faire interprète pour moi.
No, that makes sense, but that also reminds me of something Haitians always say, right? Like, keep on moon, you know,
yes,
what you need. So how would you make sure that people in the community know that you are that person to come to? You mentioned like the meetings, but how do you get the word out there to make sure?
WhatsApp, radio, television, My team will be there, Papier, however, at local churches. I know where to find all my community on Sundays. They all in churches. I know where to find them. I'll be there. Every church, every Sunday, I'm out there making sure that I'm meeting and greeting them and letting them know that I'm here for them, that they're not alone, that they have a city council member that will be present.
Thank you, Rita, for clarifying that. So Kenya, let me come to you then, right? While we're on the topic of language access and making sure you connect with the community. And obviously there are different languages across the district, right? But so the Haitian American candidates when it comes to the Haitian American community would have like this ability, right? To connect with them, not just language wise, but culturally. So how would you, make sure that you can connect with us as well without the language or necessarily the cultural fluency that the others might have?
Well, I recognize the cultural, barrier that may be there, but I think because I grew up in this community, it really is about understanding the nuances in culture, having, a network of Haitian Americans who have poured into me, raised me, who are part of the larger conversation, whether from Miami up to Boston. We have worked together, we've connected, and it's really about presence, right? It is about being there, being consistent, and it's about understanding that though I may not understand every word in Creole, it is knowing that I am of service to you. I work for you. I have been, again, working in the various positions that I've worked in, working with HabNet, work on, against USAID and the earthquake, the USAID's response on the earthquake. It's about building the relationship and then coalescing around an issue that's specific to the community and making sure that all stakeholders understand what's going on and that we're working together to solve the problem in partnership. One of the examples would be, folks don't understand that the city agencies are so convoluted. They're so, the bureaucracy is so thick that folks do not know what's out there. The fact that we already have a mayor's office of tenant protection and nobody knows that. The fact that it's under-resourced and underserved. While I was at DOI, we worked on translating the notice of eviction because there were many communities who didn't even understand that they were being evicted. And that is a lot to do with the fact that the funding isn't there, the resourcing isn't there to make sure that not only, the large scale community knows that this is available, but really specific insular communities who do not have access or do not have the representation know that this is available. And so that is what I've been doing. I have been partnering with communities throughout this district, throughout my career, to ensure that I'm not just working on your behalf, we're working together. You are learning from me. You're learning, I'm taking you in and teaching you how this government process works, why it doesn't work, how we can fix it together. I am conspiring with communities to make sure that, when you're talking about comprehensive immigration reform, yes, it's not going to be a local level initiative, but we are actually taking buses down to DC because it's about to, that conversation is about to be had. We're taking buses down to DC to fight against the Republicans who are going to be fighting against this thing, or the moderate Democrats who don't want to see access, or the African diaspora have access to the American dream. And not even, let's not even talk about the fact that even on the city level, when we talk about America and the American dream, the idea of no taxation without representation, we as a city council can actually give folks the either permanent residents or undocumented folks, we can give them the right to vote on municipal elections. And that is something that I want to have the conversation around, and I really want to implement, because there is no place where you should be paying taxes, but people aren't supporting the types of funding and programming that you would benefit from. So it really is engagement, it's in education, and it's empowering communities who are left marginal because of language access, because of traditional cultures, because of immigration status, that they will have the tools necessary in partnership with me as a council person to actually deliver for these communities. And it's because there's a lot already out there that exists that people don't know. And it literally is about being the resource. It's about connecting and making sure that you as a business owner, you as a union laborer, you have the access to the information that you need.
Oh, that's really interesting, the idea of having having the conversation of the right to vote in municipal elections for people who aren't necessarily naturalized citizens or, permanent residents, what have you. I wonder what some of the other candidates think about that idea and if they would support it if you were to be successful in the race.
I think it's definitely, this is a new idea. Well, it's an old idea, but now it's actually coming more to the forefront. The idea that maybe you're not allowed to vote in federal elections, but you do pay taxes to the city. And so therefore, why shouldn't you be allowed to participate in elections? I also believe that if we were to implement, after having the conversation around it, getting community consensus, if we were to push and implement it, it would actually push more people to say, well, I get to vote in municipal elections. Now I actually want to be able to have a say in state and federal elections. So looking at the idea, I don't yet see any downside to it. I think it expands democracy and it gets people more primed to participate in higher levels of government. So I think it's definitely an idea that we need to have a stronger conversation around. And I think given the fact that most of us that are going to be in the city council of immigrant background, I can definitely see it passing and becoming one of the major cities to push this across the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, given just the focus on making sure that Black and Brown people are represented and have a voice and are able to thrive and do well, sounds like that's a growing trend, right? We saw at the city level, Mayor de Blasio had signed that executive order mandating that the city's ad agencies spend, I believe, half of their ad dollars with ethnic media and not just English speaking media, right? That's one example. Another example I've seen or heard about is the creation of this, media diversity relations person at the city council. So it does sound like that may be an emerging trend where local representatives figure out a way to serve their specific populations to make sure they fit their needs. What are some of the other ideas or solutions that you would propose with that in mind?
Can we touch on that ethnic media part? That's a conversation that we've been having with Haitian Times, different Haitian radio stations, even in the Urdu and Spanish speaking population, where it sounds good, but I've yet to see it implemented in such a way that it actually creates a robust market for us. Very often we push legislation that sounds good, we vote on it, and it's great. And I'm for a lot of these pieces, but it's really in the follow-up. At what point do we as council members say to ourselves, well, let me check in with Haitian Times, Radio Panu, and all these other institutions to see, are the funds trickling down? Because government is a major buyer for all types of institutions, and New York City government, with its close to $97 billion and its huge ad market, can do a lot to actually support ethnic media. And one of the ways they can do that is through obviously buying ads, etc. But there's other things that they do on a routine and ordinary basis. And what we have to do, just like we're doing with minority and women business contracts is break them up into bite-sized pieces so that the wealth could be spread around, because at the end of the day, it's your tax dollars being spent. And two, we have to have a system by which we start measuring how many institutions within this ethnic media market are actually getting the dollars, how many dollars are going through it. Because it's one thing to put something out there and make people feel good, but it's a completely different thing to make sure that those dollars are hitting the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm curious to know, to stay on the topic of making sure your community gets the dollars that it needs, right? One thing I thought was interesting was Albany passing just, I believe last week, they excluded workers fund, right, for undocumented immigrants to be able to get relief that they were not eligible for from the larger pandemic packages. So how would you approach having more of those types of programs for the specific immigrant populations that we're serving? Or do you have a proposal in mind to try to support people who need affordable housing, for example, to be able to afford to stay here and live here? The question is, how would you bring in more of the dollars? And it's not just for you, Josh. I mean, Edwin, we haven't heard from you in a while. Feel free to jump in. Like, how would you make sure you get the dollars to support the specific proposals and solutions that you have? Like, walk us through step by step how you would make that happen.
I'll just say real quickly that for a lot of resources that already exist, having been deep inside the Haitian community, most of the resources that we're looking for actually do exist. It's really about understanding and access. As I said before, it's the barrier of Creole to English, where the resources there, manger en la, it's right in front of them, but they can't grab it because the language is a barrier. The understanding of the system is a barrier. Growing up, having the fact that I parle Creole and I speak English at the same time is one thing. I understand why they are not understanding these things. And I understand that when you open up your office and you're serving a very diverse community, you have to think about the fact that that diverse community needs to be able to talk to people. They're not always going to walk into the office and see a council member, but they should be able to see a staffer that can say, this is how you access this, or this is where you go to it. Secondly, a lot of that funding is coming from Albany, but it's going to end up in the hands of the city council, right? And how we choose to disperse it, who we choose to give it to is going to matter a lot. Are we making sure that the nonprofits that are representing this community, that have access to the people, are actually getting chunks of those dollars? Are we making sure that they're helping people, going through the churches, going through the different institutions, and even the businesses, and making sure that they know how to get to those dollars? And specifically for the workers program, we know we have a lot of people on TPS. We know a lot of them didn't get any of that stimulus money. A lot of them didn't get any of that, the benefits that they should have gotten. We are going to have to use our offices and the nonprofits that are set up for it to set up monthly clinics to actually bring people in and get them to understand, this is how you access this. This is how you apply for it. Yes, it's true. Let's be honest. Our people, Haitian people, need a lot of hand holding, but that experience of holding their hands through processes is also what has primed me to be able to do the same thing for Urdu-speaking people, Spanish-speaking people, because you just understand that they need an extra layer of help. And that's one of the things that I want to do as the next council member.
I want to add on something. Undocumented, we talked about undocumented people that are now getting their share of the unemployment because they weren't qualified. We also have to build that trust around them, because I remember during the pandemic, there was a fund created for undocumented workers at the mayor. When you call people and they're like, oh, go to this agency, they're providing this money, they were afraid because they thought of, okay, my ICE might get me, this could be a setup, this is immigration. Like Josh said, I literally had to pack my car, pick up some people, put them in the car, go to the non-for-profit and introduce them so they can create that trust. Because when I called them, like, listen, the mayor created this fund, you don't qualify for unemployment, this is how it's gonna happen. They were like, I'm not going, because I don't know, this could be a setup. So I literally had to take them. Literally take them there, set it up, introduce them to the non-for-profit, had them talk, and then it was like, then they went back and said, it was good, it was okay, it was safe, we were good. So we also have to create that trust as council members that we're not going to sell you out. This is not a setup. This is not an ICE trap. This is not ICE trying to get you, but we're just trying to navigate you. Yeah, they are afraid. And it's not only the Haitian community, that's across the board, that you find the fear that if I go into this agency, what's going to happen to me? Because we know a lot of times things were set up to catch undocumented people. So how do I know to trust you? So it becomes a trust issue. So we have to create that trust with the community. So when we lead them to resources, they're willing to go on their own.
I'll jump in. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
So yeah, so going back on the discussion earlier, I'm fully in support of people who are yet naturalized participating in hyperlocal elections. Immigrants at large are the backbone of this nation, of this city. And it only makes sense for them, again, in paying their taxes and being part of this local community, to be able to be exercise the right of suffrage. So in terms of the economy of the city, of the district, we have to ensure that our small businesses survive. Small businesses are the backbone, is the bedrock of the community, especially when it comes to people of color. And if you want to go further into the undocumented folks, this is where a lot of folks have employment, despite laws and such. Just last week, I took a walk with the public advocate throughout Flatbush, and we decided to take a survey to see which business owners received the Paycheck Protection forgivable loan. And it was quite alarming that, for whatever reason, a lot of the Black-owned businesses, they applied and they didn't get the loan, they didn't get any follow-up. And businesses that were owned and operated by a dominant group, they all got the loan. It got to a point where every time we walked into business, we would look at each other and say, this is an unfortunate pattern. So we have to make sure the language access is there, because that's often the barrier. They don't know, they don't fill out the applications properly, et cetera. So in order to grow the economy of the district, of the city, we have to ensure we do what we can, so small businesses can survive.
If I could jump in, I wholeheartedly agree. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there are certain communities that have operatives or Sherpas who literally utilize their networks to ensure that dollars come to the community. And so it really is important that you have someone with a large network who can leverage that network, bring that information in a culturally and language specific way, and make sure that folks are comfortable helping folks fill out the forms, making sure you're delivering that form, and that those folks in the networks in whatever agency, whether it be on the federal level, state, or local, that you can then get that, make sure it gets to the right person, as considered by the right person, and that therefore you can have better outcomes, because that is what I've seen just in my positioning, and have actually been helping communities with, is making sure that your application gets to the right person and is fairly and adequately considered. And that usually gives the better outcomes from what most folks are usually dealing with. And I think that's where the disconnect with MWBEs is, that we don't necessarily have elected officials who are ensuring that their applications get to the right places, who are ensuring that they are evenly and adequately considered, and so that we can get the best outcomes.
What you bring up, other elected officials, I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure we have a couple questions from our audience, but bringing up what elected officials currently, are not doing. For each of you, what are some critical missteps that you see on the part of other or current elected officials, like things that you just find are so obvious, or just so so obvious that you either would or would not do to make sure you're in service to the community? Then after that, we'll move into questions.
Oh, it's definitely.
I would start with the idea that we should just have office hours. And I think a lot of us are thinking, I live 2 blocks away from the current council member's office, and I ride up and down on my bicycle sometimes Rogers Avenue all the time. And it's like, I get it, it's a pandemic, but when is your office open? So if we're looking for the obvious, we can have a whole list, and when you add that list up, it becomes, what is the job of a council member? So, office hours are very obvious. I think we should have real office hours where people know they can come in and get help, whether you're Haitian or American or Spanish speaking or whatever language you speak. Everybody has the same complaint, that there's no office hours. It's hard to get to the council member. Some of the other obvious things is participatory budgeting. Like, I was one of the first people in this city to participate in participatory budgeting, because the council member in the 45th had invited me to be part of that maiden participation thing. And we're in a culture, we come from a culture where people are not part of government. And now we're in a system and a society where people are part of government. The next council member, if you are trying to serve the Haitian community and other communities, one of the things you should do is open up our minds to the concept of you have tax dollars, so you have a say. And so I think that's pretty clear. That's pretty important. It contradicts and it fights that concept in Creole called esclavage mental, which is like the idea that it's mental enslavement when you don't give people knowledge. So I think those are some of, like, office hours and participatory budgeting are two very obvious things that we could be doing to get us just to the basic level of what city council members should be doing for their constituencies.
Yeah.
What I would be doing differently. Oh.
No, go ahead.
What I would be doing differently, of course, is I'm there for my community and I'm available. And of course, as a committee member, citywide committee member in a participatory budget, make sure that I'm marketing it right, that people know how to participate, they know how to engage in the process. And of course, language access, it would be done in all of the languages represented in the district, so no one is felt left out.
Yeah, so it's participatory budgeting, and making sure that you are really partnering with the district to ensure that things are actually funded that are needed in the district, and that money stays within the district. But it's also transparency and accountability. I can't tell you, what is happening. I can't tell you the types of negotiations and what we're actually getting on a legislative and budgetary outcome. I don't know what it is. And I think there needs to be greater transparency and accountability so that you as taxpayers know exactly what the council member is doing, how they are leveraging their relationships, and what is being delivered to you in the district.
One of the things that I think is crucial is just participation overall. And, in being a first-time candidate campaigning, we use robocalls and text messages and stuff to get our message to the people. There's no reason why we can't do that for city council committee hearings also. In multiple languages, people should get robocalls, text messages. People have to know that these meetings are happening. They have to know that they have a voice, and their voice, it matters and it counts. So just educating folks by making sure they're alerted to when crucial decisions are being made, so therefore that they're properly represented.
Yeah, a lot of this just comes down to making sure you're available and accessible if you are elected, and that you go outside of the traditional methods of reaching people, to just make sure that you can find them via text, WhatsApp, what have you, so they know what's going on. So, I mean, that's really good to hear. I have a couple more questions around the participatory budgeting piece, specifically when it comes to discretionary funds that you would have as a city council member. But first, let's see what questions our audience has, being mindful of that. Here, we had one that came in over email, and the question is, Haitian-led organizations have not fared well in receiving direct funding from Haitian political legislators at the city or state level. What role do you think you can play in making this better, allowing for a positive impact in the social services arena for Haitian families in Brooklyn? I believe that. Rita, would you like to take that one? The question is, what role do you think you can play in making this better? This being receiving direct funding for local organizations.
Well, with discretionary fund, with discretionary funding, one of the first thing, as an educator, I'm always ready to educate. I think that's the first and foremost. You need to educate the community on what is discretionary funding. When do you apply for it? Who can apply for it? So when does it come out is usually the most important thing. When do you file for it? And what do you need in order to file for it? Are you a 501c3? Do you have that? If not, I don't want you to feel left out. You can also find another 501c3 that can support you as a fiscal conduit that can help you get the funding. So that has to be talked about, and that has to be taught in the native languages of the orgs as well. So everything becomes language access. Information is power. So if I inform this orgs on how to apply for the funding, they should be able to help. And someone in my office, this is one of the things, good governance is I work for the voters don't work for me. I will be available to make sure, whether it's through clinics, whether it's through Zoom, info sessions with these partners to make sure that they know when the funding is out, when it's available, when they're getting it, and how do they get it. So that's very important. Participatory budget is another thing where the community has a voice in participating in democracy. What a beautiful thing. Because I've seen other districts, by being a citywide committee, I get to work with 51 districts. And I get to see how much pride the other districts take in putting up their projects. Every time it comes to 40, it's like, one or two projects come out. Sometimes they're overfunded, sometimes they're overfunded. So there was one particular project that I saw, the school asked for $50,000, but yet they got $250,000. Then they came back to me and they were like, well, Ms. Joseph, we didn't ask for all this money. Now, what are we going to do with all this money? And I was like, I didn't fund this. It wasn't my job to give out the money, but it was my job to oversee how it was spent and how people can do it. So the next time around, I want it better marketed. I want it done in we did it in several languages, but for some reason it didn't reach out. So maybe next time we have to reimagine. COVID-19 has really changed the way we think and see and how we moving forward. We have to reimagine everything. What we used to do before is not going to work anymore. So we have to reimagine how we sell and how the community can participate in this participatory budget process. $1 million for each district. You pick a project, the community gets to vote on the project. And you could walk by and be like, listen, I was part of that bike lane that's here. I was part of that beautiful flower bed that's here. That's you, that's your pride. That's empowering the community to be part of this amazing thing we call democracy.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. So when you say COVID has forced us to reimagine, how we do things, right? What are some of the other things that you think we'll have to do differently besides reaching and educating the community?
Even how we educate our kids. When COVID hit, that was one of the things I suggested, and no one was listening to me. Maybe because when I become city council member, I'll make sure it happens. We also had to educate the parents. We also had to make sure, not only am I moving your child, my 700 kids from regular school remote to online, to modern brick to online, but the parents also needed it. And guess what? During the year, they came out with Parent University 6 months later. It needed to happen then and now. So moving forward, even our seniors who, for example, even with the rollout with the vaccine, our seniors needed devices. Our seniors have no devices. And I've seen it when I was filling out the Housing Connect. They came down like, Miss, I don't have it. And they gave me their flip phones. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't touched the flip phone. I don't know how to use this. So that's to show you we have a lot of work to do to catch up in terms of educating, in terms of making sure they're part of the process. People are not sitting on the sidelines anymore. They're participating. They want their voices heard and their needs met. So that's going to be our jobs as future council members. Whichever one of us get in, that's going to be our job.
Anyone else want to chime in and add to that? How basically to make sure, going back to the original question submitted, how to make sure that we can get dollars pushed down, right, at the local level to the different community organizations that are serving our community? How would you partner with them or make sure they receive that funding?
So what people don't really know is that when you are applying for grants, especially specifically with DYCD or an agency like that, a lot of these grants are reimbursable. So they're saying, if I'm going to give you $5,000, you have to spend $5,000 first, and then you'll get reimbursed that $5,000. So the assumption is that you have the $5,000 to spend on the front end. And so we really need to think about how we address, especially marginalized nonprofits, who do not have the same kind of income as the big nonprofits, to say, hey, if you need $5,000, this grant will give you $5,000 and you will spend it and be accountable to it on the front end, not the back end. So that is a big thing that as council member, I want to focus on, is readjusting that relationship, that grant process relationship, where we're not depending on them to have money in order to spend money. And then secondly, we have to think about, again, I talk about that like shepherd type of elected official who will, in the budget process, create the language that matches the targeted nonprofit, making sure that when you apply for grants, you automatically qualify. And that's what a lot of folks do not get, is that if you can take that language, you're pretty much not guaranteeing, but also you're pretty much ensuring that these nonprofits who fill a specific mission or programming will qualify for that, and they don't have to hire a grant writer. They don't have to go through many of the processes, the expensive processes, in order to get what sometimes, depending on the issue, is expensive in and of itself. So we want to make sure that nonprofits, I as a council member is actually setting my nonprofits up to receive this funding and making sure that you're on the back end, like Rita said, you're creating that education and resource information in culturally and language specific ways so that our people are adequately served.
I would also like to add to that we also have to look at, how is it that an organization that got $3,000 10 years ago is still getting $3,000 in funding? That to me is an indicator of stagnant non-growth. And we have to say, if this organization is important enough to get $3,000 and it's doing work in the community, why hasn't the amount of money that it's getting improved over time? So there's a lot of it that also has to do with the fact that it's the mindset of the council member. You have to look at, how do I grow these organizations? How do I make sure they have the resources to grow? And I think that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is, I'm in the community. I know who's doing the work and who's not doing the work. I see the anti-gun violence programs. I see the immigration, citizenship, education programs. I see HabNet, partially because I was on the board of HabNet, and these other organizations. And I see the fact that they're starved for resources. And you have to start to say, well, where's the money going now? And where should it be going? It's not that the organization has to exist specifically within the district, but is the organization serving the district, right? And so I think one of the first things that I personally want to do, God willing, I become the next council member, is I want to do a full reassessment of, where's this money going under the current council member, and where are the needs, and who's been doing the actual work to actually serve the community.
I'll jump in.
As an educator, that's one of the things. Data will drive my decisions as a future council member. I will definitely examine and look at data. I'm so sorry, Edwin.
Oh no, come on, it's nothing.
We have the technology to do that with the data.
Yeah.
So that's good, be able to leverage digital to get all of that information. Just really quickly, I know we're pressed for time, but there are a few questions in the Q&A. I wanted to share with you guys, and maybe Edwin, you can take this one, right? I think this is interesting because we're talking about, economics. This person asked, Caribbean people have always survived through susus and other cooperative economic means. Will you promote cooperative economics in the community to encourage more Black-owned businesses? So Edwin, since you're the first one I see on the screen. What do you
I mean, yeah, this is already part of the culture. It's already what we've been doing. There's no reason why we shouldn't make it more official. There's been conversations about a public bank, that can assist with loans, low interest loans, so businesses can open, businesses can survive. I'm in favor. I mean, the amount of times that I've benefited from susus and sols, whatever you want to refer to it as. So there's no reason why we can't make it more official.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to tap into that really quickly?
Yeah, I definitely, susus have been a major part of our economy, and certainly most people already know how to use them. Now, if you've ever been in a susu, sometimes they're a little here and there. That type of thing. And so what can we do to take a very good economic system that is homegrown and native to us as Black Caribbean folk, and maybe institutionalize it in a way? Maybe one of the things that we can do is actually say, well, how can we get the credit unions to actually set up the accounts, and then you join into whichever susu you want to join into, and it's monitored and it's done in such a way that it's structured and organized. We still get all the same benefits of being in a susu, no extra fees, nothing like that. But on top of that, it's more structured so that more people trust it. The only major issue that I have known with susus, like I said before, is like I used to be part of that susu, but you can't trust Jean because Jean be taking 2 extra hands at the end. So how do we formalize what we already know works for us and make it work in such a way that everybody's cool? Tout le monde joigne main payo, nobody leaves and say, what about my extra $50 that y'all kept last time?
You know, this is fundamental to my economic plan. What I found was that there are existing models. So like the Chase Manhattan Bank on Flatbush and Church actually does house and repository for susus. So there's precedent already there that we can then take, but it's also about, you know, shared equity. It's about making sure that, you know, we have such a grand African diasporic professional class that can, you know, we can think about how to leverage. So Prospect Lefferts Garden Neighborhood Association back in the 70s partnered with the city to actually buy up buildings, and you had shares in the buildings. We created real affordable housing. And so there's a precedent already there. EDC, the Economic Development Corporation, just put out some guidance on doing a shared equity model and figuring out how community can create the types of trusts that will invest in, you know, buying up the community, whether it be commercial spaces or buildings. And so it really is having someone who can then come in and implement on day one to figure out how we get the capital, and then using that to leverage the capital to identifying which spaces, which areas can benefit from it. And you'll see there's a whole host of folks who are already lined up to make these types of investments.
No.
And I just wanted to add on to that, Carver Bank, which I bank with, also has a system where they accept susu even for down payment on purchasing homes. So they set up the account for you as formal, like Josh was saying, they make it formal, and you come in and you deposit the money, and you can use that towards the down payment if you decide to purchase a home. The one on Flatbush and Linden.
No, this is all great information to share with people. I think we are going to have to do a regular show just to understand and see where all of these resources are on a regular basis. I have another one that also ties into, you know, economics. And I think, Josh, you might have been the one who triggered this question around housing affordability. It's like 2 questions, but I'll try to summarize them in one. First is, why would we need to build new housing for affordability when we have new buildings going up that stay empty? I think you touched on that a little bit. You drive by 123 Linden and you're just like, who's living here? It's almost like a ghost town in some ways, right? And then, yeah, how do you make sure that you stop the rezonings in the district that make it possible for all of these high rises to pop up seemingly all of a sudden? So it's a 2-part question, but related.
I'll take the second part and then move back on, work our way back, right? A lot of the times people oppose the rezonings because they just don't see themselves as the beneficiaries of the rezoning. But they should be, because the truth of the matter is the rezoning is you're taking a public good and handing it to somebody who's in the private sector. So what is the community getting when they see 123 Linden go up and it's that high, and it may have been rezoned and given a public good? I don't think people would be as opposed to certain redevelopments if in fact they knew that they could benefit from it. But the moment you walk by that front entrance of 123 Linden, you know, oh, it's not for me. I don't even think a lot of people didn't even bother applying, or they looked at it and it's like $120,000. Where am I going to get that type of money? So how do we go about rezoning? We have to look at those major parcels in our district, and we have to look at projects even outside of our district, to be quite honest. We have to have a citywide housing plan on how we're going to rezone certain parts of the city. And we have to look at our local area and say, what are the places where it actually makes sense? And we have to also be honest about where it doesn't make sense. You're not going to drop a tower in the middle of PLG Flatbush, Lefferts Manor, and you're not going to drop a tower in the middle of Ditmas Park. But there are places that we have to start looking at now. And being that I'm from that sector, that Sears parking lot, you know what's going to go down within the next 10 years in that part of the district. The question is it going to be for the benefit of the whole, or is it going to be for the benefit of a few pockets? And that's one of the things we have to consider when rezoning. So it's on a case-by-case basis. Every project has to be looked at for the merits of what it is and if it makes sense for the local area. Secondly, yes, there's a massive amount of housing stock that was built for luxury that is still remaining empty, that needs to get, and we just need to tax them to the point where it becomes not financially feasible for them to warehouse empty apartments. Like there's that billionaire's tower in the middle of Manhattan. The lights are always off. Why are the lights always off? Because it's empty. And most of the people who own those properties are those condos, those apartments are not actually even living in this city. So we can tax them, create a disincentive for them to continue to do that, and then you eliminate that type of market. But the truth is, about 500,000 people have moved into this city over the past decade or so. So where are we going to stuff all these 500,000 people? We have to, building more is part of the solution. So yes, we do have to build more housing stock. And even some of the housing stock we already have, especially for people in NYCHA, it's run its useful life. So you need new buildings. The buildings that are built are not meant to be lived in forever. Sometimes you have to knock them down and build something new, but that something new has to be good enough for you. And finally, a lot of people are in affordable housing and they're being kicked out of it, rent stabilized housing, because people are using unfair practices, and that has to stop. And again, I go back to, this is why I'm pushing for a tenant protection unit that is separate and apart from the mayor's office.
Can I add on something to that? For example, my landlord did the same thing throughout all the stabilized tenants, renovated the apartments, and they're all sitting here. So I agree, I would definitely do something called a vacancy tax as a city council member. As long as the apartment is staying vacant and no one is living in it, I would continue to tax them until they decide to come. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they will find a way to make sure it's not vacant anymore. Definitely agree with that.
I think it's really important, to answer the zoning question. We have to get rid of the zoning for quality and affordability. It's part of the larger package, the MIH-ZQA, mandatory inclusionary housing, and zoning for quality and affordability, because that created the standard throughout the city on zoning. And if we don't get rid of that, that is the law du jour. And so we can't do anything in terms of what we need to do in the district is first down zone, because we are anyone who is surrounding the park. Everyone else was down zone first before us. And until the ZQA law was passed, we had no zoning. And so we're now at the point where if a private developer can leverage the air rights, they can build a 60-story tower. So we have to make sure we down zone first so that we can set the primary level of how we want development to happen. And then we can work on redeveloping our ULURP process to make sure that the community has the control lever to ensure whether or not this is going to be really beneficial to the community and that we're going to have some kind of equity in its development. I do think in terms of preservation, when you're talking about a vacancy tax, that's very important. We also have to look at the FEPS program or the voucher program, which would raise the level of income so that you fit the affordability that exists for an apartment. That is, it's unrealistic. Basically, if I'm a family of 4, I can qualify for a 1-bedroom, and now we all have to kind of squish in and kind of reconfigure. That makes no sense. It's asinine. And so we really have to recalibrate the FEPS program, making sure that vouchers actually fit the income for 2-3 bedroom. The family to bedroom ratio is real. And that's another thing that we have to address, is that we are creating, because of MIH-ZQA, we're creating these transient, one studio to 2-bedroom apartments that are not creating real roots in the community. So you're seeing new folks come in year after year and they're leaving, and these private developers are raising the rents and making back their, they're paying back their underwriters. So we have to create space where we are building for families. And that's when you see these, pre-war apartment buildings that are beautiful if the landlord would just keep it up to code. We have to create real enforcement on building codes and making sure that they're not capital improvements that would then be passed on, the cost be passed on to the renters, but making sure that these property owners are bringing our buildings up to code so that our folks can actually live in, beautiful and really well-furnished pre-war apartment buildings. You don't want to go to the new building if you love the old sturdy buildings that we used to live in. And then lastly, we have to make prosecution on the city level of tenant harassment more viable so that we are not pushing people out. They're not using eviction as a means to push people out so that they can raise the rents on non-stabilized apartment units. So it really is, the enforcement piece has to come, and we have to think about bringing back that 70s style. If you are a property owner who is not keeping up your building, harassing your tenants, you're on the worst tenant list year after year, you need to lose your building. And then we can then give it back to the tenants and either create some kind of shared equity model, or where there's real ownership, or that there's a co-op condo kind of relationship with this. So you have the HDFC program with wraparound services to teach people how to own, how to operate their own buildings. These are fundamental to ensuring that we protect and create and expand the diversity of this district.
And I'm glad Kenya brought up the HDFC program, because that's one of the programs that I work with and I funded to ensure that if you look at on Hawthorne, there's an HDFC right there where the people who lived in the building, it took a mad long to happen, but they became the owners of that building. And I suspect the way this economy is going, the way people have these buildings overpriced, we might come into a situation where we have that opportunity again. And that's why we need to have these land bank and land trusts to buy up these properties and make sure they're available to become owned by the people who live there. Think about all those Haitian families, those Caribbean families, and Hispanic families that live along Ocean Avenue in those big pre-war buildings. They could potentially become the owners of those buildings if the owners default.
That all sounds great. And I'm sure the staff at the Haitian Times will be following up on a lot of these proposals and ideas that you have in the lead up to June. So thank you for bringing out so many of these topics. I'm just really interested to see how, what they could really look like for the person who becomes the representative. I think we have time for just one more question. And the one I'll ask is one that has more of an immediate feel to it, like buildings and like making sure people have housing for families is very important, but it's all long term. One question that has an immediacy to it is cleaning up Flatbush, right? Like, why is the district so dirty? So, and what can you do about it to make sure it's cleaned up? Who would like to take that one?
I'll jump in there. So in the fall, I started doing cleanups, volunteer cleanups with people in the community, and also some, the volunteers for my campaign. The sanitation budget was cut 106 million, and unfortunately we can see it and we can smell it. There's unemployment. We can find funds to, like, I realized so many people actually wanted to participate in the cleanup. They could have been paid. They could have been paid per diem. And we keep a timesheet. So the more cleanups they participate in, the more that they can earn. There's no reason why things should look this way. One of the reasons that the garbage is the way it is there's a lot of storefronts that don't exist anymore. And where the business owner would clean up the front of their store, they're not there. And the business down the block is not going to clean the whole block, unfortunately. So my solution is to empower folks who want to clean up by giving them some per diem income.
I would like to add further to that and present one of my proposals. So before COVID, we had a sanitation problem in Flatbush with trash on the streets. After COVID, it's gotten much worse, right? And we have stores that are closing down, etc. One of the clear solutions to this, based on my experience in government and having sat on the board of 2 different business improvement districts, is along Nostrand Avenue, along Cortelli Road, along Coney Island Avenue, and parts of Church Avenue, where the garbage is the worst. There are no business improvement districts, and you can tell that they don't exist there because, as was said before, you can smell the garbage and you can see it piling up. Those are institutions that will provide cleaning services. So therefore, if there is a store that is vacant, it will get cleaned, and from that store will get cleaned. 2, when your business corridor is cleaner, people come and shop there because nobody wants to smell garbage while they're eating their roti, their griot, or even their Chinese food. Secondly, the business improvement district would be so helpful to the Flatbush economy because Flatbush is actually very unique in the cultural offerings, the food offerings. It would help market us. It would make Flatbush a destination. You know how when people think of Harlem, they think of specific restaurants to go to? Well, when people start to think about Flatbush, they'll start to think of specific restaurants because it's been marketed to them. And so we have to start looking at not just the short-term problem of the garbage, which can be resolved through this, but the long-term, how do we make these viable economic corridors going 10 and 15, 20 years into the future? And the solution to that is the business improvement districts.
And as a future council member, I would definitely fund them because that was one of the things the Flatbush bid and the Church Avenue bid talked about. Their budgets was slashed also during COVID-19. So they were not able to hire people that used to clean the streets. So I think they had to cut back on the hours or how many people were involved in the project. So definitely as a future council member, I would make sure that they're fully funded to keep doing the work that they're doing to make sure that Flatbush Avenue and all the other areas that we saw that was filthy, and all of us have taken part in cleaning the areas, and somehow I've run, or we've either done them together or we've been in the same space cleaning up this community that we love so much and we plan one of us will represent.
You know, I wholeheartedly agree. Just like Josh, I sat on about 4 business improvement districts at the controller's office, and it's not necessarily a bid. It does not have to be a bid. It's organizing your businesses, your property owners, making sure you're getting buy-in to clean their storefronts. But what we've been finding out is that even when you sweep the storefronts, there's not really any place where the garbage to go. We still have these old school, corner garbage cans without tops, without bags, and the garbage just flies out into the street again. And so it really is having a comprehensive sanitation plan for the community and making sure that the existing bids that are there, the very functional merchants associations that are there, making sure that we have a comprehensive plan around it. Now, it's also about dealing with parking and alternate side parking and street cleaning, because a lot of times they sweep it into the street, and if you don't move your car, it just piles up into the street, and then it blocks the drainage in the community. So you start to see a pile up of water, and so you see the floods in the on the corners of sidewalks. So it really is making sure that you're having a functional transportation strategy, you're having a functional business investment strategy, and that we're refunding and making sure that there's continuous funding for our sanitation. It was cut $106 million. So the idea is that we have to replenish that funding and then make sure that the garage, because apparently our district, the sanitation garages are split. We need to bring our garages back so that when they're doing a rotation, that we're hitting all of the districts in one stride, and not the southern part getting, having their trucks coming from somewhere outside of the district, whereas the northern part will see a continuous rotation of their trucks. So it really is having a large scale, comprehensive small business and transportation plan.
So like we said, this is definitely eye-opening, and there's a lot more I think that we can say. We are at time, unfortunately, but I think if you all are willing, we'd be happy to host you again later in the coming month or in June to talk through some of the other topics we didn't get to. public safety, unfortunately, we didn't have time to talk about making sure people are set up to come out of this pandemic, okay, if not thriving, we didn't get to touch on. And these are all important issues that we know our community cares about. Language access, again, we started talking about it quite a bit. I think there's a lot more to be said. So we will collect our questions from the recordings and views that we get online and share them with you, or invite you back to address them, maybe do a Q&A if that's okay directly. But to all of you, I thank you so much. Kenya, Rita, Edwin, and Josh, thank you for making time. We look forward to continuing the conversation after tonight. And for everyone watching, don't forget, June 22nd is the election, right? Ranked choice voting. So think about, from what you heard tonight, who would be your first, second, third, fourth, or fifth choice, if there's a name there. So please get ready. Make sure you check your voter registration card. You're eligible by the deadlines, all of that good stuff. And certainly email us submissions at haitiantimes.com if you have any questions we didn't get to today. As always, follow us on social media, follow the candidates, and stay engaged with them. Like they said, it's a two-way street. They're here for you, they're open, but you also have to make an effort to share with them what's on your mind. So again, thank you everyone, and have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
All right, guys, be safe out there, guys. I'll see you out there.
Thank you. Good night. You too.
Bonne soirée.
Bonne nuit tout le monde. Merci.
All right, bye-bye.